Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nicole Ndumele. I'm the Senior Vice President of Rights and Justice at the Center for American Progress. Welcome to today's event. Before we get started, let me do a quick piece of housekeeping to say that live captioning is available by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. Now, today's event is about one thing: giving people a second chance. For the over 70 million people in this country with a criminal record, re-entry into society is a terrifying proposition. Hundreds of barriers stand in the way of housing and residency. For the 90% of employers that carry out background checks, someone with a record is nearly half as likely to get a job offer as someone without. And the impact doesn't just affect them. Half of children have a parent with a criminal record, and this can hamper school performance, development, education, even future earnings. A system of automatic expungement is key to giving millions of people a second chance. It makes them less likely to reoffend, less likely to go back into the legal system, and it puts them in a better position to support their families and contribute to their communities. That's why in 2014, CAP, in partnership with the Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, or CLS, developed Clean Slate, a movement that seeks to automatically clear eligible criminal records in the United States. In 2016, CAP, CLS, and the National Employment Law Project launched a 3-year initiative laser-focused on advancing Clean Slate at the state level. And in 2019, all that work culminated in Pennsylvania becoming the first state to pass a Clean Slate law. In the following year, 35 million criminal records were sealed, with over 1 million Pennsylvanians reaping the benefits. It changed their lives. It made it easier for them to find a job and a home, to support their kids, to better integrate with their communities, and to do all that without stigma. The success of this model led to the founding of the Clean Slate Initiative last year, an organization whose express purpose is to elevate the Clean Slate model across the country. And they've done just that. Since then, Utah has implemented its own Clean Slate bill. Michigan, Delaware, and Connecticut are following close behind. And a number of states, from Texas to West Virginia, have legislation that's been introduced. And that's not to mention the bipartisan Clean Slate Act that's been proposed in Congress. For millions of Americans, Clean Slate policies have already changed their lives. It's given them a real second chance. And with these bills in legislatures across the country, there's now a powerful opportunity to ensure that millions more are granted that same chance. So I'm going to hand it over to the Executive Director of the Clean Slate Initiative, Sheena Mead, who will be moderating today's discussion, and who is a longtime advocate committed to ending disenfranchisement and discrimination against people with convictions. But before I do, I want to share with you a few of the stories that would be powerfully and positively impacted by this legislation. Earlier this year, CAP released a video telling the stories of 3 Missourians who are advocating for the passage of a Clean Slate law in their state. Their words can lend far more weight than I can about just how important this reform is to people living with a record and the profound impact and effect it has in changing lives.
My name is Dan Hannikin, and I'm the Executive Director of Introductory.
My name is Patty. I'm a social worker with the City of St. Louis and a grandmother of 5 grandchildren.
My name is Fran Marion. I am a manager at Taco Bell here in Kansas City, Missouri. I am a mother of 2.
And I'm living with a felony record.
And I've been living with a criminal record.
Living with a record. I got my record trying to cash a stolen check. It was a $700 check to be exact.
I started using drugs when I was about 13 years old. I had to be able to feed my addiction, and I would shoplift to do that. And that sent me to prison for my first time in 1984.
I went to prison for the first time when I was 26 years old. I spent 3.5 years in prison for a car accident that I caused while I was drinking. I had no idea the challenges that I would face when I was released from prison that first time. Everything from housing to employment was impacted.
I've spent the past 20 years trying to get past my record. The people in my life most affected by my record are my children.
My wife.
My kids are doing a life sentence with me because it affects me keeping a roof over their head. I can meet every criteria for a job, but you see that felony, it's over with.
It's like carrying weight around my neck.
The weight, I'll probably carry this for the rest of my life. The first word that comes to mind is free.
Free.
Relief. Relief from the constant anxiety of someone finding out about me. I would say to people who are hesitant about passing any legislation is that we're just like you.
I clock in like everybody else. I pay my bills like everybody else. Why can't I be entitled to that second chance?
Those of us that are convicted felons, we want to turn the page.
What society would get by passing Clean Slate is a law-abiding citizen, a voter, a person that can give back to society.
That's a win-win for everybody.
People have possibilities. I don't care who they are. Everybody has something to give, but you don't know that until you give them a chance.
We're not just a cell number, we're not just an inmate number. I am a mother, I am a manager, and I am a leader. You know, I stand up for what I believe in. And I believe in Clean Slate, I'm standing up for it, so I need y'all to stand with me too.
Wow, that was a powerful video. I know most folks on this webinar probably feel the way I feel right now, a little bit of goosebumps, and I'm excited for the people who are looking, who will begin to Clean Slate. Thanks to Nicole and to Kat for their central role in jumpstarting Clean Slate and putting a pathway to provide second chances to millions of people. Their partnership has been invaluable. Actually, going on 2 years ago, in May, probably was my first webinar as the new executive director for Clean Slate Initiative, and it was celebrating with CAP. And so thank you again to CAP and their partnership. My name is Sheena. I'm the executive director of the Clean Slate Initiative. And record clearance is an issue that not only that I just work on, but it actually personally affects me. Myself and my husband, we are impacted by the legal system. We have convictions and non-convictions on our records. And we understand the importance of a second chance. We understand the benefit of having a second chance. And so I'll be moderating today. I feel like this is my little Oprah edition. I always want to, like, people know I love to moderate, a little bit something different than just being on a Zoom. So today I'll be moderating today's discussion about how second chances benefit all of us. I want to introduce and thank our panelists for being part of this discussion and taking time on this Wednesday afternoon to be here, and also all the people that is participating and watching us today. So today we have a dynamic group and panelists with us. First, we have Akua Manin, is the Director for Criminal Justice Reform at CAP. In her current role, she works to advance progressive policy solutions that ensure a more equitable justice system while providing protections and opportunities for those who have been directly affected by the criminal justice system. Also, we have Diane Goldstein. She's the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. She's a retired law enforcement officer and is a nationally recognized speaker, writer, and guest lecturer on criminal justice and drug policy reform. We also have with us today, Tony McWright Jr. is the Senior Program Specialist on Justice Initiatives team at the National League of Cities, where he works to implement restorative criminal justice policies at the municipal level, using his lived experience in the carceral system to bring new approaches to ongoing and new initiatives. And last but definitely not least, we have Jill Snyder, is the Policy Director for R Street Criminal Justice and Civil Liberties team. She leads the program of producing research and commentary on public policy related to all stages of the criminal justice system: policing, pretrial, policy, sentencing, incarceration, juvenile justice, and reentry. Jill is also a retired New York City police officer. And one more thing just to add to her bio is Jill is also a lecturer at John Jay College. I want to thank you all again for joining us today and being here today. So we're going to start today's discussion with a couple of general questions to establish some background about second chance policies, and then move on into more specific discussions about impact. I would like to note for our audience that you could use the question and answers feature to pose questions for the panelists. And at the end, we'll come and do a Q&A. We'll try to get to all the questions, or as many as that we can on this call. And so please use that function. I'll remind you a little bit towards the end, because I know a lot of questions probably gonna come up. So we're gonna start this call off with Akua. So Akua, CAP has some of the most groundbreaking research on clean slate policies and how record clearance is required for more effective reentry. Can you explain what kind of obstacles people face trying to re-enter into society when they have a record?
Yeah, so returning citizens are faced with a lot of obstacles when trying to successfully re-enter society. And I think the Clean Slate Missouri video did a really good job of showing just some of those barriers that people face when they're trying to rebuild their lives. You know, you have barriers to employment, housing, education, voting opportunities, and just contributing to society overall. And if we look at things like employment, for example, finding meaningful employment is very important when reentering. That's how people make a living, right? So it can be very difficult for returning citizens when 9 out of 10 employers use background checks in their hiring process. And we know that a study from the University of Michigan Law School found that job applicants with a conviction record are 60% less likely to receive callbacks than those without a conviction history. So already there's a barrier to obtaining a job, regardless of whether you are qualified for that position. And then not only is there barriers to job opportunities, through application process, but through occupational licensing and certifications. Right now, 1 out of 4 jobs requires some sort of occupational license or certification. However, many state licensing laws and regulations allow licensors to actually deny applicants these licenses because of their conviction history alone. So, these barriers are very significant. And research tells us that when people are faced with so many barriers to successfully re-entering society, and the longer it takes to find, a stable life, the more likely they are to recidivate. And we know that these barriers are so significant because we see that nearly 2/3 of formerly incarcerated individuals end up finding themselves back in jail or prison within the first 3 years. So the obstacles to reentry are truly significant.
Thanks, Akua. And one thing I want to note for our audience is that when we talk about people who are have these barriers, we're not just talking about people with just convictions. We're also talking about people who have non-convictions on their records, and that also serves as a barrier. People who have been arrested and maybe something has not got, either an offense got dropped, they were found innocent, but that arrest still shows up. And that brings me to Tony, because you have firsthand experience navigating reentry and dealing with the challenges personally of having a record. So what policies and resources are out there for people trying to rebuild their lives, and how accessible are they?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good day, everyone. First of all, thank you, Akua and American Progress, for having me here today. I'm grateful, and all returning citizens are grateful that you are one of our allies in efforts to reduce jail and prison populations in this country. And Sheena, thank you for the question. If I can start with accessibility and go back to policies, I'll say that while clean slate laws are at the state level here at the NLC, We look at everything from a city lens. So I'm going to take a very narrow view for your question. But as I talk to city leaders about what they can do to reduce barriers to reentry in lieu of a clean slate law, many see it as a federal or a state issue because that's who brings charges, that's who controls incarceration. Cities more or less are for jails, short term, as you just mentioned, but that still affects your record, affects your life. However, when you leave federal systems, state systems, everyone comes back to a city. And right now, the nonprofits try their best to fill these gaps in services for reentry at the city level. But without support in terms of funding and coordination, what we have is a hodgepodge, if you could call it a system, where accessibility varies depending on where you live. For example, when I came home from federal prison, I was accepted into the Georgetown Pivot Program in DC, where I was taught by some of the top professors on this planet. I received mental health services. I had internships in the business community, workforce development training, subway cards from the DC Employment Services, license voucher from the Office of Returning Citizens. So true wraparound services. And DC now is one of the few states / jurisdictions where you don't lose your right to vote due to a conviction. So outside of no arrest and expungement, I'd say my reentry was pretty good, right? Like compared to most, relatively speaking. But I know in reality that's not the case, right? That's not what most people come home to, what I experienced. And so, like Nicole said at the beginning, I was terrified of what lied ahead as I was about to leave prison. Terrified. I was wondering if I was going to have to apply at the McDonald's down the street or work construction, because prior to release, coming out of the federal system, I just wasn't made aware of any reentry services or resources. And so luckily I had established a relationship with Georgetown from involvement in pilot programs behind the wall, but accessibility shouldn't depend on luck or geography. There needs to be standardized reentry and expungement process similar to what Clean Slate Initiative does.
Thank you, Tony. You really, I want to say welcome home. I'm glad you in this space and, leading just even, in the movement, and also with your lived experience, sharing your experience. And, you talked about DC and the resources. I'm sitting here like, wow, I live in Florida. I wish we had some resources like that. And it's so important to help with reentry. And that kind of goes to the next question, which I'm going to point to Diane. You spent 2 decades as a law enforcement officer. So can you give us your perspective on what factors matter most when it comes to making sure people with records don't end up back behind bars?
Sure. This is probably critically one of the most important questions, especially right now, in regards to so many positive things that I think are moving forward. So I come to this both from my personal and my professional experience. I had an older brother that was criminalized for his substance use disorder, mental health issues, subsequently passed from a drug overdose in 2007. So I saw the impact of his convictions on his life, where he had like 20 years of being a person in recovery. And when he lost access to his health care and his psychotropic meds, he started self-medicating again and was recriminalized, and how that one felony conviction almost sent him back to state prison. And if it wasn't because of my knowledge of the criminal justice system and my resources, I was able to get him into drug addiction treatment, right? But that's not everyone's story, to Tony's point. Across the country, we see how previous convictions can come back and haunt people for things like public health issues. And so right now, our organization, in conjunction with CAP, had launched last year or the year before, our community responder model. And what we know now, both empirically with research, is that we've siloed criminal justice and policing in particular from being connected to every other system that really is more efficacious and preventing crime first. That should be our goal right at the top. Is law enforcement is the last piece of the puzzle in order to prevent violence in our community. There are so many other systems that need to be invested in very heavily, whether it's, healthcare issues, socioeconomic issues, education issues, wraparound resources. And so when we talk about how we prevent crime, we have to invest in systems up front. And then we have to understand that people and citizens returning, including my brother who didn't do prison time, but county jail time, want to have access and return to society in a way that, is so they can be completely reintegrated back into their families, back into the economies, back into feeling good about themselves. And I think that's a big part of the system as it stands right now is conviction records really go beyond economics. They go into the denial of human decency, family responsibility, and basic citizenship. And we have to stop treating people for their lifetime for maybe the worst moment that they had at one point in their life.
Amen, Diane. As we're talking about law enforcement, Jill, I want to come to you. Your background is also as a police officer. How do you respond to questions about whether record clearing creates any public safety risk?
Well, to piggyback, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Cap. Thank you to Clean Slate. Thank you to Sheena for moderating this today. I do want to piggyback off of what Diane said because she hit the nail on the head. Law enforcement should be reserved for preventing new crimes from occurring. And Clean Slate gives us the opportunity because we know, and I was a cop in the Bronx for a very long time. I arrested some people regularly. And when I spoke to them, their story was not something I hadn't heard before. It was, yeah, you locked me up a few months ago. I got back out. I don't have a job. I don't have a place to sleep. I don't have any money. And I'm trying, but no one will hire me. And the driver behind their criminality, the reason that they went and committed another crime was because they couldn't get a job. They couldn't find a place to sleep. Or again, something that we fail to recognize, our system is not addressing mental illness accordingly. And that is also a driver in criminogenic behavior because people are not getting the wraparound services that they require. So what I do right now is I advocate for people like this every day, but I do get pushback. We have seen an increase in crime. People are saying, well, how would these not impact public safety? It would actually be very positive in terms of enhancing public safety. Clean Slate Initiative would give opportunities to people who want them and, more importantly, deserve them. They would not be forced into a life of recidivism. They would be able to be contributing members of society. And now talking to people, previously justice involved people, that's what they want. And it's unfair that they're not able to go out, get jobs, get meaningful, good employment where they could take care of their families, take care of their children, have a nice roof over their head, and do everything that everyone else wants to do.
Thank you, Jill. That's really helpful. What we're about to do, we're going to move to some more group, some questions that I'm going to just put out for the group, and whoever wants to jump in can. If we're getting a little quiet, I'll point some folks out, but I think we have some good questions. And then also for our audience, please put in the chat if you have any questions. I see some coming in already. Again, if we can't necessarily answer the question from this panelist, I want to make sure that we could get to your question, follow up with folks, and also maybe direct people to resources or somewhere that could really answer their questions, because we may not have all the answers on this call. So, as Nicole said in the beginning, the number of states advancing Clean Slate is expanding, and that's great news, but we know there's a lot of people that have records that may be on the municipal or federal records as well, and these two can be barriers. What could be done about local records and federal records to increase second chances?
Can I jump in real quick? And I think this is one of the most important questions is that people's personal stories are critically sometimes missing. And, that video that we saw in the beginning really brings home that personal impact. And I, as a subject matter expert, can go in and speak to legislators at the local, state, and federal level all the time, but without partners and personal stories that I've heard today, we have an impact, and we can, work to push back the law enforcement opposition or the district attorney opposition, but people, legislators and staffers really respond to personal stories. And so this is so important. I want to point out to California in particular that folks may not know. In California, if you're convicted of a crime, if you don't obtain expungement or pardon, which is really a long process, your record stays on for 100 years before it automatically drops off. Any conviction, whether it's an infraction or a felony. And so we have to continue to push hard to make changes into individual state systems, as well as the local and the federal.
Thank you, Diane. And I actually want Tony, if you could lean in here, because, you know, just to up the question is, a lot of people on the local level, right, are actually have records as well, municipal records, and also federal. And Akua, you could jump in here as well, because I know CAP has been really instrumental in working with Clean Slate around the federal act. And so if y'all could talk about that a little bit as well.
Sure, I'll take the city aspect, and Akua, you can chime in from the federal level. First of all, I want to chime in on what Diane said about personal stories. You know, there's a lot of push for data. City leaders want to hear about data because that's what drives their decisions, and rightfully so. But if you combine that with a personal story, we see that that there's a positive effect with that, and city leaders start moving once you get in the room with someone who's been directly impacted. Here at NLC, we have efforts that try to have cities take a plan of action. We published a brief recently. I did some research last year on the city level landscape of reentry, and one of the 7 recommendations I came up with was to expunge or seal records to create a pathway to full citizenship. We had mayors come in from across the country as part of a task force to develop a comprehensive effort that we called Reimagining Public Safety at the city level. And one of the recommendations, again, was to concentrate on reentry. And then finally, we've launched a municipal reentry leaders network this month that brings together reentry directors from all across the country. And we're hearing that this is the first time that there's this collaboration, this peer learning network where cities can learn what other cities are doing to help with reentry in lieu of clean slate laws in their states. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, it's always seen as a state level issue. So we talk to city leaders about steps they can take now to help remove these barriers until clean slate policies are in place. Applying for federal second chance grants, urging HUD to reduce the barriers to housing, because housing was the #1 issue that came up during my research. Mental health, as Jillian just alluded to, was #2. We're grateful to hear that Secretary Fudge has issued a memo requiring HUD to look at, you know, how they can reduce barriers to housing. We champion including reentry, specifically expungement and fines and fees absolution as part of city's overall public safety policy. And I always point out that the president, with his community violence intervention collaborative to reduce violence and enhance public safety, specifically names reentry as one of the 5 pillars. So if reentry is included as part of a city level safety initiative, we believe more progress in this space can be made until those states adopt clean slate initiatives.
Thank you, Tony. And Akua, do you want to chime in a little bit around the barriers on the federal level?
Sure. So at the federal level, the problem is right now, most federal records are not even eligible for expungement. There's no federal expungement legislation, nor do courts have the authority to expunge records at the federal level. So we really need equitable opportunities for record expungement just on the federal side of things. And that's kind of where the Clean Slate Act comes into play. We have legislation at the House level and Senate. Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester is leading in those efforts to bring Clean Slate automatic record clearance at the federal level so that federal records have an opportunity to be expunged.
Thank you, Akua. So also the next question I want to pose is, data shows tremendous racial disparities in many aspects of policing, sentencing, incarceration and reentry. How can we construct second chance policies and record clearance to address these so that we can have more equitable outcomes? And how does reducing crime impact Black and Brown communities? Diane?
And I'd love Jill's input in here also, but from LEAP's perspective, I have to say very clearly right now that one of our big goals is not just in developing systems that reduce the footprint of policing. So police officers don't even need to be called for minor things that really we shouldn't be responsible for. So as an example is I literally got sent as a patrol officer to 2 cats, as in feline versions fighting before. Complete waste of resources, right? And so we have to reduce the footprint of policing, which is really critically important. But in addition, we also have to regulate police powers. And that's the importance of reforming drug policy and a lot of other, low-level type of offenses. But, the concerns, especially with the uptick in crime right now, is I think it's also very important for us to realize that we have to invest in those upfront systems so we can divert people out of the criminal justice system, whether it's through pre-booking diversion or completely deflected out of the system, into programs that provide opportunities for people to succeed so they don't continue to, engage in criminal acts potentially because they're hungry or they need to feed their kids. So that's, I think, 2 of the ways of doing it, but it's going to require money. And we have, and political will. And we have to also invest long-term in strategies. Our legislators and staffers and police chiefs, a lot of times invest in short-term strategies and think a year or 2 of money into a program is going to solve a problem. And it's not. We have to start looking at outcome studies based on 5 years, 10 years, and then do reassessments every single time when we develop a policy, a program, or even the impact of a law.
Thank you, Diane. And I know, Jill, as a professor and also in the role that you play at Archery, you probably get this question a lot. So I'd love for you to weigh in here with your perspective.
Well, looking at it, like Diane said, the first thing that we have to do in really fighting for racial equity in life and in the criminal justice system is pulling back the reins in terms of reducing the police response to everything. We should be reserving law enforcement for the situations in which they're needed. And a large majority of the situations, they're not needed at all. Over 20% of police calls for service in the United States are for mental health distress calls. That really does not necessitate a law enforcement response. And often it would exacerbate the person suffering from the mental health crisis at that time. So like Diane said, our street, my team and I, we've been doing a lot of work with trying to recognize where the opposition from law enforcement comes from and what we could do to inform them. Because a lot of it is just, they're not really concentrating on what the data is showing them or what the evidence shows them. They're going back, oh, this is what's been done for years and years. We're just going to keep doing it. But we have so many alternatives to arrest these days. We have citation in lieu of arrest. We have, as Diane said, police deflection, where at the moment of interaction between a police officer and a citizen, understanding that person is not in need of the criminal justice system. They're in need of some type of deflection that gets them the help that they need, gets them the resources they need. Then you also have diversion strategies, mental health courts, drug courts, co-responder models, law enforcement assisted diversion programs, community responder models. There's so many different things out there. And unfortunately, agencies are not yet employing those options.
Joe, you just gave a hell of a list. I don't know if I can say that on this webinar, but can you write that down and send it to me? Because I need that. That is, I think we don't talk about that enough, about these alternative measures. And it's really valuable coming from, people who are with law enforcement background. So thank you for schooling us today on this call and our audience. this is for everyone and whoever wants to jump in. What are the biggest opportunities and challenges to helping key stakeholders connect the dots between record clearing, second chances, and increased safety?
I could kind of segue or connect the last question to this one, because obvious I'm a brown person and I didn't answer the question about Black and brown people, but I looked at my watch to see how much time we had, because that's a loaded question. But I was so glad to hear Diana and Jillian especially talk about, as you mentioned, Sheena, the diversion programs, the community responders. I'm going to have to team up with Jillian and Diana after this call. We have so many things in common. And I think that goes into this question about connecting the dots. What we need to do is, in my opinion, to help combat this narrative that Jillian just mentioned about, people coming home from prison and just running rampant and anarchists, and they're the reason for this rise in violent crime, when the data suggests otherwise, and people just aren't looking at it. So I think it's going to take people like us not just preaching to the choir, but getting in front, of people on one accord, our street with NLC, with people like myself who just coming home from prison. And as Diane said, sharing a personal story, right? Because I think that's what's going to be needed to move this needle and this narrative to really reflect what the data is saying, which suggests that people coming home from prison, when given opportunities, actually have a higher attendance rate at work, a lower offense rate than the general public. Right? But no one's really talking about that. And so I think it's going to take this reaching across the aisle type effort to really move the needle and change the narrative right now.
Thank you, Tony. And we're about to move to the audience questions. But before we do that, I know sometimes when we do panels, it's like, I meant to say this. Is there anything folks want to kind of add before we move into the next set of questions? Go ahead, Jill.
I just wanted to say something, because I think what Tony pointed out, this is not something that's one-sided. Over 70% of America agrees in clean slate opportunities and clean slate initiatives. And I think one of the things that people fail to realize is those that are opposing it still, law enforcement, prosecutors, they don't know the facts. And the fact is 6% of the population commits 60% of the crime. Most people do one thing in their life, one thing, and they shouldn't be punished for it. But we need to really reallocate all of our law enforcement resources to just focus on that small, very small subset of people who are really creating the chaos in society, because most people are good people. And I just wanted to end with that.
Go ahead, Akua. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jill. And I'll just add, second chance opportunities are not against law enforcement. They are public safety measures, and we should treat them as public safety measures as well as support for those re-entering society. When we are able to help individuals re-enter society successfully and help them provide for their families and themselves and contribute to their communities, we all win. So it's not an adversarial approach. This is something that, as Jill mentioned, most people can get behind. Most people do get behind. It's just a matter of making it happen.
Sheena, let me just really quickly, is because all these points are real valid. And so Tony talked about reimagining policing, and Jillian and I have talked about this before. We really need to start linking community health and safety and not calling it public safety, because that abdicates control solely to the criminal justice system. And we have to stop siloing the criminal justice system away from every other community resources, including that everyone is a stakeholder in community health and safety, including people who are returning citizens, Tony. I think there's a lot of value to making certain that every stakeholder is at that discussion of creating what community health and safety means in their own individual neighborhoods, cities, states, and at the federal level.
Thank you, Diane. You made some great points. I would just add in here, I was in Utah a few months ago at the press conference where they started to implement Clean Slate, where it went into the automation of Clean Slate. And in Utah, Clean Slate was led around a workforce issue, not just really a CJ issue. So it's really, like you said, not siloing it and connecting those dots. We're going to go ahead and turn over to our audience for questions. So you could go ahead and start moving those fingers, y'all, and put some questions inside the chat. And again, I will go ahead and pose the first question to the group. And if you can answer some of it, it's okay. We can't get to all of it because some questions are asking for a little bit more specific details, but this is what I'm excited to hear y'all answer. So how likely, this actually is from Josh Marcus from The Independent. He said, how likely do you think that New York will pass Clean Slate, and what kind of impact will it have on the state if it does? And then also, yeah, just a little bit more to the question, and you can pick which part you want to answer, Jill. What about some of the other changes being discussed in the state, increasing use of cash bail, increasing police enforcement on subways, suspending reform at Rikers Island? What effects could those changes have on public safety? Are those the right kind of investments to make, or should more be put into reentry services? Seems like we answered a little bit of that earlier, but I just want to fully read out. So passing over to you, Jill.
That is a very long question. Okay, so first things first, I am I live in New York. I'm from here and I'm still here. And I'm very optimistic of where New York's Clean Slate legislation is going. My team and I have actually been working in New York, trying to reach out to people, putting out, critical pieces of information, publications, really in support. So I'm very optimistic. Again, Clean Slate will pass in New York State. Going to the rest of that question, because there was a lot there. I heard bail reform measures, eliminating cash bail, amongst other things, increasing police presence on the subways. I actually was down at, I was down at the subway shooting incident that happened a couple of weeks ago, because I was asked to speak on police tactics and police responses in situations like that. And I think that the mayor in New York City, he is obviously he's getting all these different things, all these different people telling him what to do. Obviously, when something like that happens and makes international news, BBC actually reached out to talk about it. So it made it around the entire world. And I think we shouldn't knee-jerk reaction and be like, oh, let's flood the subway system with police officers, because we did that years ago when I was a cop, but that didn't work either. I think it's really about understanding what caused that incident specifically to happen. It was an anomaly. I'd hope that nothing like that would ever happen again. So again, flooding the subway system with police officers, not the most effective thing. Recognizing what led that individual to allegedly commit the acts that he did, that's more important. What was the motive behind that crime? Let's address that. Additionally, when it comes to bail, New York is often the one that people call and point to and say, bad idea, New York. Why would you do that type of bail reform? Very drastic, very progressive. I don't think that we have enough longitudinal data to make that assumption. I do not at this time see the bail reform laws that have taken place in New York. I don't see that they are the direct contributor to the violent crime increase in New York right now. Again, not enough long-term data to analyze, but I don't like finger pointers and people saying, oh, that's not the way to do it. What we should be doing is taking a step back and assessing it on doing it cross-sectionally and trying to understand, did we go too far? What can we have done differently? Should we take all the discretion away from the judges, looking at other states that have implemented other bail reform measures that have proven successful without increasing crime?
Thank you, Jill. And we're New York is most likely to pass. We are excited about the work that's happening in New York. We shout out to our partners, to the advocates, to everyone that's been working tirelessly on Clean Slate New York. They are very active there and really excited about what they're about to do. Okay, I have a question that came in from Jesse for Tony. So our city's training law enforcement officers, what the collateral consequences of an arrest or conviction are on the impacted individuals. So are we training law enforcement on collateral consequences? Are we educating that community?
No.
Thank you. You saw me. I don't know if there are any city leaders on here, but I was trying not to offend any. But the answer that we've come across would just be no. I mean, at the city level, unfortunately, and I did, as a fellow here, I took almost a year to do research, and I kept looking for evidence that cities are being proactive in training law enforcement and providing services in just so many areas. The answer was no, because they feel like it's not a city issue, right? We had a conference last month, and after a presentation, a city leader came up to me and said, I've never heard of, I know this isn't directly to Jesse's question, but I've never heard of a reentry director. And this is in a major city outside of a major metropolitan area. And I was like, okay, where do I even start, right? Like, you're doing absolutely nothing for people coming home. And you just told me that, right? Like, she wasn't saying it in a malicious way. She was like, oh, I've never heard of a reentry director. I was like, well, what do you do for people coming home? Oh, they get arrested at the county level, state level. And okay, so what do you train people on how they come home? Do you have racial equity training? Anything that, anything at all? And the answer, is astonishingly is just no so many times, right? I mean, just little things like when we talk about racial, we have a racial equity team here, and some of the coaching is just on how some people use their hands. Like certain cultures, we use our hands more than other people, right? That doesn't mean we're reaching for a gun. It doesn't mean we're mad. We just use our hands a little more. And so I haven't found any cities like that really have taken an initiative to do any law enforcement officer training when it comes to that aspect. And I don't know, Diane and Jillian, you may have, since you dig deeper into that than I do and have more experience, you may have a better answer than I do.
I think law enforcement is just really, they're trained of what happens in that moment. And then after you go to court, and if you're a cop and you make an arrest and you do your testimony, after that, it's considered your job is done. And cops are really, they never think about what happens to this person after. Where is this person going now? This person's going to be incarcerated. One day this person's going to come home. Cops don't think about that. And please don't think I'm shaming like my law enforcement community at all, but historically that was nothing that ever concerned law enforcement, because we were like, oh, there's services at the end of this system that will handle that, because honestly, that's how the criminal justice system operates. It's so siloed from each other. And again, not directly law enforcement's fault, but this is something that we need to be teaching cops every day. Like this, you have to think about why this person did what they did. And because it'll really make you reconsider like how you deal with people regularly. You can't look at every single person as a criminal. Something happened that led to this criminal behavior. And that's like probably midway through my career, I started seeing it like that. When I started seeing the same people that I had arrested 2, 3, 4 years ago, and I was having interactions with them again, I was like, what is going on? And it really was eye-opening, because I was like, what's happening? And they're like, I just got out. I don't have anything else. So I had to steal this again, or I had to do whatever they did. And it really, to me, was like a revelation, like made me think about the aftermath of an arrest and what happens to them later on through life.
Thank you.
To Jill and Tony's point real quick is we need to also change the metrics of policing, because I think that's also part of kind of what appears as a lack of compassion or empathy towards the impact of the criminal justice system. And so, we look at drug policy in particular from LEAP's perspective. That's always been kind of our underlying, the failures of the drug war, the impact on communities of color, over policing, over criminalization. And if we educated cops at the beginning and then followed up with it, and if I, as a young police officer, understood the racial basis in the passage of drug laws going back to, the 1900s, I would be appalled. And that could have changed the way I think, the viewpoint of law enforcement. So we have to start changing academy training, in-person training, but we also need to start evaluating policing, not necessarily on how many people we churn through the system in order to promote them, but on the absence of crime and community satisfaction.
This conversation is great. I'm really enjoying what's coming out of the conversation here and how folks are connecting the dots. Another dot connector, something that comes up a lot, and someone throw this out there: have any state policies included provisions addressing or eliminating criminal justice debt as a barrier to record clearance, what we call fines and fees?
Just chime in very quickly. There's a huge fines and fees clearance movement right now. There was just a conference a month or so ago mayors from across the country and nonprofits have come together. Here at NLC, we're doing a second fines and fees initiative. Again, this is city level, because that's where my experience is. But I know at the city level, there's a big push for finding out how to make fines and fees equitable. If you're not eliminating them, make them fair, because $100 to someone making $10,000 a year isn't the same as $100 to somebody making $100,000 a year. And so we're looking at ways to make them equitable, as I said, make them fair. And because we see that fines and fees hurts Black and Brown communities more than others. I'll defer to the other two panelists if they have more information at the state level.
If not, we could move on because we have some great questions coming in and we're almost near time. It's passing really quickly. So which states are leaders in Clean Slate? Which states are leaders in Clean Slate is a question we have. And what elements of policy in these states are important to prioritize? What are the distinctions? And I probably would go ahead and want to give this actually over to Akua, who works very closely with the Clean Slate team. And also just, want to raise up Akua. It's maybe great to talk about the distinction around, there's a lot of people working on Clean Slate across the country, which is beautiful. But when we talk about Clean Slate policies, referring to the work that we're doing, we're talking about automation. And so if you want to just speak into that, about what states we're in and what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's right. Clean Slate in our terms, we consider that as automatic record clearance measures. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by leading, but in terms of the states that are engaged in Clean Slate, Pennsylvania was the first to pass their Clean Slate legislation and go into implementation. They've now been in implementation phase for a few years now. And within their first year, they had huge progress, huge successes. We saw over 1 million records cleared that helped hundreds of thousands of individuals, which was amazing. That was the first year alone. Utah was the second state to pass their Clean Slate measure, and they just started implementation back in February. So they are now starting the process of clearing records. So excited to see what they're doing there. Michigan and Delaware have also passed Clean Slate measures, and they will be going into implementation phase within the next year, both states. And then, of course, we're seeing in a lot of activity in Connecticut, New York, Illinois, Colorado, Oregon, a lot of states interested in enacting their own Clean Slate. Louisiana and Texas are others as well.
Yes, thank you, Akua. And because of the states that are leading the way and that are engaged, it's definitely creating momentum across the country. It's creating a momentum and pressure on our federal elected officials in the administration, because there are approximately, and Akua or anyone could call correct me on this number, around 12 million people with federal records. And right now there's no mechanism to clear them, not even a petition base. And so we have the bipartisan bill, the Clean Slate Act, that is co-sponsored by Lisa Blunt Rochester and Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. So, there is, the states are definitely sending echo and sound across the country and to DC about what we need to go further. So I think go ahead. I'm going to probably try to see if I can fit 2 more questions in there. And then I want to conclude the event to make sure that you all are able to leave people with something before we conclude the call. Was you trying to say something, Diane? Okay. I really like to take this question around business, if anyone can speak to it, because we have been working a lot with business partners. We have a question that says, what do you say to a business owner who is concerned about what Clean Slate will mean for his or her hiring process?
So in my past life with my ex-husband, I owned a business, and some of our best hires were people that were returning citizens and had past convictions. I don't think it impacts a business owner in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't change your process. And in fact, I think we were very grateful to have the opportunity to make someone's lives better in many aspects. So I think, and LEAP as an organization actively seeks out the people who are returning citizens as well. And as the executive director of a nonprofit, again, same type of thing, I think we have, as business leaders or executive directors of nonprofit, we have moral obligations to make our entire communities better and uplift people. So I think it's all very good.
I'll just chime in and reiterate, I kind of alluded to this earlier about the statistics that bear that people who, given opportunities, again, show up for work at a higher rate than people who don't have criminal records. And if people are concerned, or business owners are concerned from a financial aspect, WIOA has always had plans in place where you get insurance or incentives for hiring people with records. So even before Clean Slate is in effect, there are incentives for businesses to hire people with records.
Yeah, and I just want to say a lot of businesses are stepping up. I could tell you at least once a month there is a new corporation or business reaching out to the Clean Slate Initiative, and we connect them with our partner, Responsible Business, RBIJ. I sometimes get that acronym wrong. We love acronyms in the movement, so I get it wrong. But who are working with businesses, and there's a coalition of Fortune 500 who have endorsed the Clean Slate Act. And a lot of they realize there's an untapped workforce, and a lot of people want to get back to work, and they're trying to figure out the how and how to do it in a real intentional way. So we see JP Morgan leading with an example of how they're advocating and working aside Clean Slate, but also how they're walking the walk too. They're hiring people who are directly impacted. They're looking at their policies and stuff. So a lot of businesses are really stepping up to the plate. And I hear more of people wanting to get engaged rather than less engaged. We have a lot of questions, and we're actually at time. Tony, you have your hand up. I'm gonna give it to you real quick.
Just very quick, I want to add on to the business part. There's a Second Chance Business Coalition that's out there. And then also the question in the Q&A was about hiring practices. Free Cap Financial actually has a justice scorecard, which tracks publicly traded businesses who, and part of that compilation is Second Chance hiring.
Thank you. And I am hoping that the CAP team will be able to get to folks' questions that were not able to get answered in some way that we're able to, and maybe they could, I don't know if they have access to send it to the host or chat, but a host or panelists, maybe a contact information, and so we could direct resources to the people, because there were some more very directly impacted people who had some questions specifically, and I want to make sure we are hearing what you're asking and direct you to resources. So listen, this is the speed date. We got I don't know if the clock's gonna shut us down. So we got 60 seconds. Do y'all have just one thing y'all want to leave folks with, and then we could conclude? So I'll start with Akua.
First off, thank you, Sheena, for moderating this discussion for us today. Just want to leave folks off with, just a reminder that second chance opportunities are for us all. It's better to bring people into our communities and help folks reintegrate into society and contribute, and we all win in this way.
Thank you. Diane.
Personally and professionally, what this panel has just been amazing, and I learned a ton, but I'm just going to piggyback on Akua. And the most important thing we can do as leaders is working coalition with unlikely and innovative partners, and the importance of having that bipartisan reaching over the aisle here is so critically important, because this isn't a conservative issue, this isn't a liberal issue, this is a human rights issue.
Thank you so much. Jill?
I just wanted to thank CAP and Clean Slate again for putting this together. This has been a really informative panel. I learn something every day when I talk to these wonderful people, but just something to leave everyone with is providing people with second chances, deserved second chances, will eventually increase public safety for everyone.
Thank you, Jill. And Tony, I want to I'm gonna give you the honor. You are the only male on the call, so I'm gonna let you go ahead and close it out and leave us with something and the people with something.
Well, I mean, the other panelists and Kua did such a great job just now. My biggest takeaway today is this reaffirms, what I already felt, like public safety is not a partisan issue, even though the narrative may look like it is. But what we need is what we have today. People like me and you, Sheena, with lived experience in the justice system, sitting down. We have voices at the table finally, and we have to make sure we are being heard. This is not an anti-police movement. This is not a anti-anybody movement. This is a public safety for all movement when you talk about clean slate, reentry, et cetera. And I think that's the message that we can come together on and make sure that's heard loud and clear.
Thank you, Tony. And last thing I'll say is I want to just thank all the panelists. I want to thank Cap and CSI for putting this on, and also Cap for allowing me to moderate and have my little Oprah moment today. And I want to say that it takes a village, it takes a community. This is definitely people over politics, as you heard today, and understand that, we want to continue to humanize this. It's more than a number. When we say 70 to 100 million people, we're not just talking about the people directly impacted, we're talking about their communities, their families, their schools. And so I want to thank everybody today for joining us. Thank you to our partners at CAP for co-sponsoring this event with CSI. Thank you to our panelists and those who all joined to participate. Share with someone today on this hump day on Wednesday about what you learned today. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.